Now welcome to another lightning response video. This time we got a question from Kaliohu who asked, "Hey Thor, I feel many folks don't understand Lucas never had some grand plan for the franchise. He was making up much of it as he went along, which he was fully within his rights to do. New Hope was an unexpected success, which was both a blessing and a curse for him. It gave him all the funding he'd ever want, but also forced him into making more of it forever. I was curious if you ever got the same impression that I had, that Lucas always seemed to be kind of disinterested in Star Wars, or at least not anywhere near as interested as the fandom was. He never knew much about the EU despite having to approve of it all, and his use of terms like laser swords always seemed a bit odd. Star Wars seemed to exist like a rough sketch in his mind whenever he talked about it, but what's your take on how Lucas thought of his franchise?" And first of all here, he kind of had a grand plan for Star Wars, though I know what you mean. He didn't have it all mapped out. He didn't think it would be this massive success that he would end up working on for pretty much the rest of his life, nor did he ever want to work on it for the rest of his life. But he did have hopes of the first Star Wars movie being a success and him being able to make more of them. What he wanted to do was to make a series of movies similar to the serialized shows he grew up with as a child, like Flash Gordon. He tried to get the rights to Flash Gordon and failed. It's also interesting to note he almost directed Apocalypse Now, and if he had done that, he may have never actually done Star Wars. Anyway, depending on what interview you go with, he said anywhere from 6 to 12 movies was the hope. That he kind of had an outline for all of them, but again, not anywhere near a solid outline. It wasn't all written down and mapped out. I agree with you that things kind of changed as he went along. He had a sketch in his head that would fluctuate depending on, again, what interview. But either way, he had no way of knowing that Star Wars was going to be a success, and certainly no way of knowing it would be a massive success, arguably the biggest or one of the biggest movies in the history of film. Back in 1977, after it came out, he said, "I thought it might be a minor hit, maybe make back its budget and a little more," but of course it made a lot more. And that then allowed him to do The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi and pretty much any other Star Wars movie he would ever want to make. However, in 1983, after the first trilogy was over, he said, "I'm not sure I want to spend the rest of my life doing Star Wars. I've got other things I would like to do." And that would be a recurring theme in interviews with him as the years went by. Even before the prequels, he was saying, I'm going to do these, but then I'm done. I want to move on to do other projects. I want to do smaller projects like I initially did. And then after the prequels were over, he said, "I'm done with Star Wars" once again, even though he was kind of working on the Clone Wars. But he did, as we discussed, I think yesterday or the day before in a video, he didn't really want to work on the Clone Wars forever. That was not the initial plan. He kind of wanted to get it off the ground and running and then to slowly fade into the background and let others handle it. He also had plans to do Star Wars Underworld, the live action show. And again, he wanted to get it up and off the ground and then have other people work on it, while he went and did smaller films, his own personal films. In fact, when he sold Lucasfilm, that is exactly what he said. I know so many people always say, he sold it because everybody crapped on him after the prequels and everybody hated on him. I don't think that had anything to do with it. I mean, maybe a small degree. But he said then, "I don't want to spend the rest of my life doing more Star Wars. I want to make these little personal films that may never be seen by anybody." He also recently got remarried. He had another child. And so after losing his first wife because of Star Wars, because he said that he was basically a workaholic and he focused too much on that and she left him, I think this time he wanted to do it right. Basically, and this is pure conjecture on my part, but I think, yes, at first when you're 30 some years old, like Lucas was when he started to work on Star Wars, or late 20s, whatever it technically was when he started to actually sit down and work on the scripts and all of that, you see you have your whole life ahead of you. You're like, yeah, I'm going to make like 12 of these movies. It's going to take up a chunk of my life. And then I move on to the next thing. And then suddenly it's ultra successful. And that is the only thing anybody wants from you ever again. Now, yes, he's made other movies. Don't get me wrong. But he is Star Wars. Everybody wanted Star Wars from him. And I think part of the reason the EU happened is because he didn't want to do Star Wars as much as everybody wanted Star Wars from him. Yes, he loved it. Yes, he appreciated the fact that it allowed him to do whatever the hell he wanted with the rest of his life because money was no longer ever going to be an issue for him. But I don't think he was ever like that into Star Wars. Again, it's something he decided to do back in the early 70s. It was going to be a series of films, and then he was going to move on to the next thing, but it never allowed him to do that. And I think, yeah, of course he liked it. He loved it. He wanted to finish it. He did give us the prequels. At one point towards the end, he was planning on doing the sequels as well until he sold to Disney, which again kind of debunks the whole I wanted to sell it because people hated the prequels. I think, yes, that bugged him. Certainly it bugged him. But I don't think he cared that much. In fact, he joked about when he was going to make his sequels and it was going to be about the microbiotic realm and midichlorians and the wills and all these sorts of things. He joked that people were going to hate that one too, but that didn't seem to stop him from wanting to do it. Anyway, again, I think Star Wars was just bigger than he ever could have imagined it would be, bigger than his delusions of grandeur could have ever predicted it would be. I mean, who could have ever thought he was making the biggest movie of all time, perhaps? He never thought that. I'm sure nobody working on it ever thought it was going to be that big. Again, he acknowledged he hoped it made a little bit of money so that, well, it wasn't a bust and that perhaps someday he could do more of them. He could finish the story that he had in his head. But like you said, I think it was always just a rough sketch. I think everything Star Wars is a rough sketch in his head. That is why, depending on when he was interviewed or what year or what time, he says different things. There is a lot of contradiction in things he says about Star Wars, which, yes, makes it rough or difficult to quote him and to say, well, this is what Star Wars is because in 1983, after Return of the Jedi, he said that. But then you look at 1999 or 2005 after the prequels and he says something completely contradictory. So I agree, it's more of a rough sketch. It's more of an idea in his mind that was always taking shape and always becoming something bigger and more concrete as the years went by. But I don't think he ever wanted to spend his life trying to make it fully concrete to build out that entire world, which isn't to say he isn't an amazing world builder, but I don't think that's really what he wanted to do. I don't think that's what he cares the most about. I think he kind of does it by default, if that makes sense. He's more about telling the story, and it just so happens everything he surrounds it with is just kind of fascinating and interesting. His imagination is a one-of-a-kind type imagination. But again, I agree with you. Everything I've ever seen and just the impression you get from him is that, yeah, he loves Star Wars. He enjoys making it. I don't think he regrets his life. Or maybe he regrets some things, yes, with his first wife and that he wasn't always there for his kids. Don't get me wrong. But I don't think he regrets that his professional life was Star Wars. I just think he wanted it to be more as well. Again, he's always talked about returning to smaller personal films or films that he just wants to do. And when he sold Star Wars, he said it was time to pass it on to new filmmakers. And again, I think that's what the EU was as well. It was his way of passing Star Wars on to others who had a lot more passion to really dive into every aspect of the universe and to keep telling stories. Whereas that was never his goal, that was never his desire, that was never his passion. Sure, he loved Star Wars, but it was a happy little accident, you could say. A happy little masterpiece that was never supposed to be the rest of his life. Alright, that is going to be all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn. Take to the comments below and tell me what you think on this one. Do you think George Lucas is not the biggest Star Wars fan, in a manner of speaking? That, again, it was a happy accident that he took full advantage of, but not something that he wanted to take over the rest of his life? Or you can always ask a question for a future lightning response video. I've been getting a ton of questions again lately. I'll try to keep cranking out these videos. But if you want to ask one, start your comment off with "Hey Thor, ask your question." I try to answer it in a future video. But whatever the case may be, leave those comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.